The world just split in two. In a single week, Washington slammed the brakes on its own allies, TSMC, Samsung, and SK Hynix, cutting off their freedom to ship chips into China. No warning, just a wall of licenses that could strangle factories in months. And while America builds barriers, Putin is opening valves, funneling 100 billion cubic meters of gas straight into China, enough to replace all the energy Europe lost. German plants are collapsing, Korean exports are plunging, Japan is hedging with Beijing, and Trump is doubling tariffs at home. This isn't trade friction anymore, it's a global reset. The only question now, who adapts and who gets crushed? Smoke was already rising when Washington struck. The U.S. Commerce Department called TSMC, Samsung, and SK Hynix into line and told them their waivers were gone. No more free shipments of American chip-making gear into their Chinese fabs. Every single tool, from etching machines to wafer inspection units, would need individual licenses starting December 31st. Bloomberg reported that more than 1,000 new applications are expected each year. Overnight, the world's most critical industry was dragged into a waiting room where Washington holds the keys. Executives in Seoul didn't need memos to feel the blow. Nearly 14% of South Korea's total memory chip production comes from inside China. Without timely tool replacements, fabs in Wuxi and Dalian could see lines stall within months. Macquarie Capital's Arthur Lai warned in September that any holdup in approvals would disrupt production almost immediately. At TSMC, Morningstar's Felix Lee noted the firm may try to rush parts into Nanjing before the cutoff, a last-minute attempt to armor its Chinese site against shortages. These are not strategy choices. They are panic measures dressed up as logistics. In Washington, Trump held up a thick tariffs folder and reminded reporters why he pushed for this blockade. At a rally in Phoenix, he declared that foreign chipmakers would pay 25, 50, maybe 100% to export if they didn't bring factories to U.S. soil. He smiled as the crowd roared. His argument was clear: pay tariffs or build in America. But in Tokyo and Seoul, the mood was grim. Companies see a trap. If they bend to Washington, they risk losing China, their biggest market. If they resist, they face punitive duties and licensing hell. Beijing sees opportunity. In August, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation revealed a 7-nanometer chip produced under sanctions. The Wall Street Journal wrote that each American restriction only accelerates China's innovation drive. Citi analysts warn that Chinese memory firms will step into gaps left by constrained Korean suppliers. Saxo's Charu Chanana said the U.S. isn't chasing short-term profit cuts. It's trying to freeze Beijing's chip capacity for decades. Yet history shows pressure often breeds independence. Each blocked shipment becomes another reason to double down on domestic tech. Across the border, another deal was inked in Moscow. Vladimir Putin sat with CNPC executives and confirmed an increase of gas deliveries through the Power of Siberia pipeline. Current flows stand at 38 billion cubic meters a year. The new agreement adds 6 more, and plans for Power of Siberia 2 would send an additional 50 billion annually. Reuters called it the most ambitious gas project on Earth. As U.S. chip companies wait on paperwork, Russia is laying pipes that could reroute the equivalent of Nord Stream 1 straight into China. European factories have already felt the cost. In August, Germany's chemical sector operated at 72% capacity, the lowest since reunification in 1991. French economists admitted defeat in the solar sector, conceding Chinese producers have pulled irreversibly ahead. The IMF's Energy Outlook projects China's gas-fired power capacity will double by 2030, fueled by discounted Siberian gas. Trump is trying to choke technology with tariffs, but Xi Jinping is signing pipeline contracts that guarantee energy for decades. The difference is visibility. One system is built on license denials, the other on steel and pressure valves. The divergence grows sharper with labor data. The ISM's August manufacturing index came in at 48.7, its 6th straight month below the 50-point expansion line. Executives told the survey committee that tariffs forced them to raise prices 24%, yet profits didn't rise. One manufacturer said 15% of its U.S. staff had been laid off across 2 rounds. Engineers, designers, operations managers. Challenger, Gray and Christmas reported nearly 900,000 job cuts so far this year, the highest since the pandemic. The Bureau of Labor Statistics may soon revise away close to 1 million jobs from 2025 tallies. Reshoring was sold as revival, but the numbers hint at retreat. Investors quickly marked the risk. TSMC's U.S.-listed shares slid 2.3% when the waiver news broke before paring losses. Analysts agreed the revenue impact was small. Nanjing makes up only 3% of capacity. But that wasn't the point. The precedent rattled markets. If Washington can choke off even low-end Chinese fabs overnight, what protection do advanced plants have tomorrow? Every investor memo asks the same question. What happens when the licensing bottleneck hits high-value nodes? Russia's numbers give their own answer. Trade with China now exceeds $240 billion annually. One-third of Russia's total exports go east. China sends only 5% of its exports to Russia, but the imbalance locks Moscow in tighter. Sanctions that once targeted isolation have deepened dependency instead. Putin called Power of Siberia a game changer and posed for cameras with engineers by the pipeline's projected route. Mongolia's deputy prime minister confirmed transit talks this spring. If construction begins, Europe's hopes of regaining cheap energy will die with the welds. And here the air shifts. Halfway through this story, assumptions collapse. The idea that sanctions isolate adversaries looks fragile against a map where pipelines are extended and factories keep humming. Let's stop here, because the whole board just flipped in a single move. India has doubled its Russian oil imports since 2023, despite being a U.S. security partner. Japan, under heavy Western pressure, increased its purchases of Russian LNG by 9% last year, tied to stakes in Sakhalin too. Energy security has pulled U.S. allies into Moscow's orbit, even as Washington pulls their tech firms into licensing queues. The contradictions no longer hide in footnotes. They stand in the open. Xi Jinping signed pipeline agreements in Beijing with Mongolian officials at his side, treating the deal as both economic and diplomatic theater. In the same week, Trump pounded his desk and promised tariffs on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and any foreign production that dared leave U.S. soil. Two leaders, two strategies. One uses scarcity, the other abundance. Japan and South Korea are forced to measure both. Samsung earns more from Shenzhen than from Silicon Valley. SK Hynix assembles nearly half its DRAM chips in China. If they uproot to Arizona, they risk dependence on U.S. policy and lose the world's biggest market. If they stay in China, they face Washington's choke points. Their ministers shuttle between embassies, drafting emergency letters to the Commerce Department, while calculating energy costs for factories that may eventually run on Russian gas. South Korea's Ministry of Trade confirmed that chip exports to China plunged nearly 23% year-on-year in August, the steepest drop since 2020. Reuters noted that the decline came just as Washington pulled the waiver program, amplifying fears that Korea's $99 billion semiconductor trade is now exposed to sudden collapse. Local unions in Gyeonggi province warned that layoffs could hit tens of thousands of skilled technicians if Chinese fabs are forced to idle. At the same time, Bloomberg reported that Russia's budget surplus for July was fueled almost entirely by record energy receipts from Asia, with oil and gas revenues up 43% from a year earlier. That money is underwriting Moscow's military spending and insulating its economy from sanctions. Europe, in contrast, is cutting industrial power usage by as much as 15% to avoid blackouts, according to Eurostat. The EU's reliance on spot LNG cargoes has left factories exposed to price spikes, while Chinese plants secure long-term Siberian contracts. Meanwhile, the Financial Times revealed that Japan's largest steelmaker, Nippon Steel, quietly signed a supply agreement with a Chinese state utility to secure discounted gas electricity rates, highlighting how even U.S. allies are hedging against energy insecurity. These deals expose the limits of Washington's strategy. Chip choke points create headlines, but energy pipelines create lock-ins. The question intensifies. When allies are squeezed between U.S. tariffs and Eurasian fuel security, which direction will they ultimately choose, and how fast could the realignment unfold? The global ledger grows uneven. According to S&P Global, China became the largest LNG importer in 2024, surpassing Japan. Add in pipeline flows and the Asia-Pacific becomes the dominant hub for gas. Western LNG exporters from Texas and Qatar must fight for shrinking margins. Meanwhile, Chinese AI firms surge. DeepSeek recorded 2.7 billion visits last year, ranking second worldwide despite bans in several G7 states. If Beijing keeps feeding such firms with domestic chips and Russian energy, the center of technological gravity begins to slide. U.S. manufacturing shrinks while Asian factories power forward. Global capital follows certainty, not rhetoric. When Russian pipelines guarantee decades of supply and Washington threatens yearly license fights, the decision of where to build becomes less about loyalty and more about survival. Trump can slam folders and Xi can sign contracts, but markets don't wait. They count numbers. 1 million jobs may vanish from U.S. records. Nearly 900,000 have already been cut. A PMI at 48.7 shows contraction, not growth. In contrast, 100 billion cubic meters of gas are now scheduled to move east each year by the end of the decade. The balance of energy and technology tilts. Picture the end, Trump at his desk with tariffs stacked high, Xi in Beijing flanked by Mongolian officials as the ink dries, Putin at a valve turning steel wheels that reroute entire economies. Behind them glows a figure US manufacturing stuck below 50, Russia's gas deal promising volumes Europe once thought permanent. And the last question doesn't rest in speeches or sanctions, but in the silence between machines. If chips are slowed by licenses while pipelines roar with fuel, where will the world's industries anchor? And who will be locked out when the gates finally close? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.